So think about this. Someone says, I am always lying. We might think we can reason our way out of anything. Oh, wow. So the prisoner's logic backfires. It shows how even seemingly simple concepts can become incredibly complex when you really start to think about them. So I both exist and don't exist at the same time. My head hurts already. It didn't take into account the very nature of surprise.
It's a question that has been debated by philosophers and theologians for centuries. The omnipotence paradox.
Sounds pretty terrifying.
It shows how tricky it can be to apply pure logic to situations that involve uncertainty and human psychology, flaws in the way we usually think about. Dive into the world of time travel. If your grandparents never met, your parents wouldn't have been born, and neither would you.
All right, get ready to dive into some seriously mind-bending stuff today, because we're tackling paradoxes.
Paradoxes, those things that sound impossible but kind of make sense at the same time.
Exactly. Those statements or situations that seem to contradict themselves but might actually reveal hidden truths.
Or maybe even expose flaws in the way we usually think about things.
Yeah, it's like they're designed to make you go, wait, what? But in a good way,
Totally. They're like little puzzles for your brain.
So are you ready to get started with a few of them?
Absolutely. Bring on the brain twisters.
All right, let's jump right in with a classic example, the liar paradox.
Oh, that's a good one.
So think about this. Someone says, I am always lying. What does that even mean?
Well, that's the whole point of the paradox, right? If they're always lying, then that statement itself has got to be a lie.
But if the statement, I am always lying, is a lie, then they're telling the truth.
Right, which completely contradicts the whole idea of them always lying. It's like the dog chasing its own tail.
It's a never-ending loop. So how do we even begin to make sense of this?
Well, the liar paradox isn't really about finding a solution. It's more about highlighting the limits of language and self-reference.
The limits of language. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. Think of it like a snake eating its own tail.
Okay.
The statement refers to itself in a way that creates a closed loop, a kind of logical knot.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get it.
Even though it's kind of frustrating, it actually reveals something pretty important about how language works and its limitations.
So it's not just a silly word game. It actually has some deeper meaning.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to another famous paradox that gets into the idea of identity. The Ship of Theseus.
Oh, I've heard of this one. It's about a ship that slowly has all of its parts replaced over time, right?
Yep. Imagine an old wooden ship.
Okay, got it.
As the years go by, planks start to rot, sails wear out, they get replaced one by one.
Makes sense. Got to keep the ship afloat.
Exactly. But eventually, every single piece of the original ship has been swapped out with a new part.
So is it still the same ship?
That's the question. It feels like it should be the same ship, because it's been continuously maintained.
But on the other hand, none of the original material is there anymore.
You've hit the nail on the head. What defines the identity of something? Is it about the physical parts, or is it something more than that?
That's a tough one.
Think about its history, its purpose, maybe even the stories associated with it.
It makes me think of that saying, you can't step in the same river twice.
Oh, I like that.
Everything is constantly changing, even if it seems like it's staying the same.
Absolutely. And this idea even applies to personal growth and identity, too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, let's say someone gets a lot of plastic surgery and changes their appearance significantly.
Okay, yeah.
Are they still fundamentally the same person?
That really makes you think.
The Ship of Theseus pushes us to grapple with these questions of identity and change.
It shows how even seemingly simple concepts can become incredibly complex when you really start to think about them.
Now, are you ready to dive into the world of time travel?
Always. Time travel paradoxes are some of the most mind-boggling.
All right, buckle up, because we're about to explore the grandfather paradox. Imagine you invent a time machine.
Oh, wouldn't that be amazing?
And you decide to travel back in time to stop your grandparents from ever meeting.
Prevent them from falling in love, starting a family, the whole 9 yards.
Yep, but here's where it gets really interesting. If your grandparents never met, your parents wouldn't have been born, and neither would you.
So I would just disappear. Poof.
Well, that's the paradox. If you were never born, how could you have possibly traveled back in time to stop them from meeting in the first place?
So I both exist and don't exist at the same time. My head hurts already.
It's a classic time travel conundrum. The grandfather paradox exposes the potential problems that arise when we think about changing the past.
It makes you wonder, are there any solutions to these time travel paradoxes?
Some physicists think there might be. They propose the idea of multiple timelines as a potential solution.
Multiple timelines, like parallel universes?
Kind of. Imagine that every single decision, every little change to the past creates a new branching timeline.
Oh, wow. So, like, there could be infinite versions of ourselves out there, all living slightly different lives.
It's a mind-blowing concept.
Okay, I need a moment to process that.
Me too. Time travel can really mess with your head.
Definitely. For now, let's take a step back from those crazy possibilities and look at something a little more down to earth. Literally.
Sounds good to me. What'd you have in mind?
Well, it's a simple question that's been bugging me for a while. What exactly makes a heap of sand a heap?
Ah, you're thinking about the Sorites paradox. I love this one.
It's just a bunch of sand, right?
Well, that's where things get tricky. Imagine you have a big pile of sand, a definite heap. Now, picture removing one single grain of sand. Is it still a heap?
Yeah, I guess so. Taking away one grain wouldn't make much of a difference.
Okay, but what if you keep removing grains one by one? At what exact point does it stop being a heap? Is there a magic number of sand grains that defines a heap?
I never thought about it like that before.
The Sorites paradox shows how challenging it is to define certain concepts, words we use all the time, that are actually quite difficult to define precisely.
It's like, when does a child become an adult? Is there a specific birthday that makes you officially an adult? Or is it a gradual process?
Precisely. The Sorites paradox highlights those fuzzy boundaries in our language and thinking.
So it's not always about black and white answers. Sometimes things are more nuanced and complex.
Get it. Sometimes the lines are blurry.
Speaking of blurry lines and tricky situations, are you ready to meet Bob the barber?
Is this the one where he only shaves those who don't shave themselves?
The one and only.
Bring on the barber.
Okay, so Bob's got this rule. He only shaves those who don't shave themselves.
Sounds simple enough.
But here's the catch. Does Bob shave himself?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
If he shaves himself, he's breaking his own rule.
Right, because his rule is to only shave those who don't shave themselves.
But if he doesn't shave himself, then he falls into the category of people he should be shaving.
It's a real damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation.
Exactly. Just like the liar paradox, the barber paradox shows us how contradictions can sneak into what seem like perfectly logical systems.
It's like those hidden loopholes that lawyers are always looking for.
It's a good reminder to always question assumptions, even when things appear straightforward.
All right, ready for another round of time travel? Let's fire up that imaginary time machine again.
I'm always up for a good time travel paradox. Where are we going this time?
This time, we're going back to visit a young Michael Jordan, before he became a basketball legend.
Yeah.
And we're bringing him a special gift, a pair of his own iconic sneakers, but from the future.
You're talking about the bootstrap paradox. Love it.
So we give these futuristic sneakers to a young Michael Jordan.
Before they were even invented.
Exactly. Now imagine this inspires him to team up with Nike and create that very shoe line.
Based on the shoes you brought from the future. Okay, I see where this is going.
But here's the question. Where did those shoes you brought back in time originally come from?
Right. If they didn't exist until Michael Jordan designed them, based on the shoes from the future, where did the future shoes come from?
It's like a chicken and the egg problem, but with time travel. The shoes seem to exist without a clear starting point.
It's mind-blowing. The bootstrap paradox challenges our typical linear understanding of cause and effect.
It suggests that maybe things can exist in a kind of circular causality or maybe even in a closed time loop.
Time travel never fails to bring up some wild possibilities.
All right, ready for something completely different? Let's get a little abstract, shall we?
Hit me with it.
Okay, try to wrap your mind around this. The Banach-Tarski paradox. In the simplest terms possible, it suggests that you could take a solid sphere, cut it into a finite number of pieces, and then reassemble those pieces into two identical spheres, each the same size as the original.
The Banach-Tarski paradox, that's one of my favorites.
Seriously?
Yeah. It's a fascinating mathematical concept. While it's not something we can actually do in the real world, it still raises some interesting questions about infinity.
It's like saying you can magically duplicate a pizza just by cutting it up the right way.
It does kind of sound like that, doesn't it? The Banach-Tarski paradox highlights the strangeness of math.
And it shows how theoretical possibilities can sometimes defy our everyday experiences and intuitions.
Are you ready for another one?
You bet. Lay it on me.
Okay, this one is called the paradox of the unexpected hanging. And it plays with logic and the element of surprise.
Okay, this sounds intriguing.
Imagine you're a prisoner and you're sentenced to be hanged sometime next week.
Not good.
The judge tells you that the hanging will happen on a surprise day. You won't know what day it is until the executioner shows up at your cell.
So the prisoner is just waiting in suspense all week. Sounds pretty terrifying.
It is. But the prisoner starts thinking, okay, if I'm still alive on Thursday, then Friday can't be a surprise, so they can't hang me on Friday.
Interesting logic.
Right. And then the prisoner applies the same thinking to the other days of the week. If they're still alive on Wednesday, Thursday can't be a surprise, and so on.
So by that logic, none of the days can be a surprise, so the hanging can't happen at all. The prisoner is safe.
Well, that's where paradox kicks in. By ruling out all the days as possibilities, any day now becomes a surprise. And guess what? On Wednesday morning, the executioner arrives.
Oh, wow. So the prisoner's logic backfires. Even though it seemed airtight, it didn't take into account the very nature of surprise.
Exactly. It shows how tricky it can be to apply pure logic to situations that involve uncertainty and human psychology.
We might think we can reason our way out of anything, but sometimes life throws us a curveball and logic isn't enough.
Agreed. Ready for our final paradox for this segment?
Definitely. Bring on the final challenge.
Okay, let's talk about the big one. The omnipotence paradox.
This is the classic question about whether an all-powerful being can create a rock so heavy they can't lift it, right?
That's the one. It's a question that has been debated by philosophers and theologians for centuries.
So can they? Can an all-powerful being create such a rock?
Well, if they can create such a rock, that would mean there's something they can't do, lift the rock, which contradicts the idea of them being all-powerful.
Right, but if they can't create the rock, that also seems to limit their power.
Exactly. The omnipotence paradox suggests that the very concept of absolute power might be inherently contradictory.
It's a puzzle that forces us to think deeply about the nature of power, possibility, and even the limitations of logic itself.
And it reminds us that even the most fundamental concepts can be more complex than they initially appear.
Agreed. Well, that's all the time we have for this segment of our deep dive into paradoxes.
But don't worry, we'll be back with more mind-bending puzzles and thought experiments in the next episode. Stay tuned.
Until then, keep those brains buzzing, and remember, sometimes the most confusing ideas can lead to the most profound insights.